What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report's Black Masculinist news for the day. I appreciate your patience. I think I'd let you guys know on my Wednesday live show, my computer crashed Sunday night and Monday morning on two whole different levels. So I'm just now getting it built up. I got it built up enough to do my show Wednesday, but in terms of my daily recordings, I had to reset my mics and do a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'm still kind of getting it together, and I appreciate you guys' patience. Nevertheless, today I thought I'd deal with an issue that I think has been pretty consistent. This is a piece that BGS sent me. Shout out to BGS. And it's dated 1991, August 14th, 1991. And you can find this on New York Times, and it's entitled Detroit Boys Only Schools Facing Bias Lawsuit. Now, what I'm going to talk about is not necessarily about boys' schools, but has everything to do with the problem people have with any emphasis on black boys, right? And it's interesting for me too, because even on YouTube, when I post videos on boys, they're the least watched videos, even by black men. You know, I posted a video, I think over a month ago, on the young men that were killed the same day and in the same city where the 4 little girls were bombed in Alabama. Nobody cared. That video still has less than 1,000 views. I posted another one on a young man that was killed. We ignore it. So I find it highly problematic that even black men will ignore the videos on their own plight, let alone on the plight of their sons. But nevertheless, this piece reads, desperate over the wasted lives of its young black men, Detroit is about to open the nation's first public schools for inner city boys unless a court challenge blocks them. Other large cities have contemplated similar schools, but have backed away in the face of political pressure or the fear of lawsuits. Move this over a little bit. There we go. That has left Detroit with the nation's most radical attempt to rescue the next generation of black boys, many of whose troubled older brothers have been already lost to drugs, prison, or homicide, by isolating them in classrooms with specially trained teachers and curriculums emphasizing black achievements. Here, the plan is seen not as fashionable education theory to be tested, but as an experiment with lives at stake, a last chance to save families and ultimately the city itself. People here know what it means to bury a young relative or visit one in jail, says Frank Hayden, vice president of the Detroit Board of Education. We've just got to do something to turn this madness around. But just 3 weeks before the schools are to open, the plan has been thrown into question. A lawsuit to force the male academies to admit girls was filed in federal district court on August 5th by the American Civil Liberties Union and the National Organization for Women Legal Defense Fund, and Judge George E. Woods will begin hearing testimony on Thursday. Now, this is what I'm talking about. So we can already see this happening, and we're going to look at another couple of instances where it does. But just the overall idea that you can't have anything for boys, and this is probably around just a little bit before we start to hear rhetoric about black boys being super predators, and of course, when Biden himself initiates the new crime bill, this is around the same time period, if not a little earlier. But attempts to offset this are immediately sought to be disrupted. Right? Okay, so it continues. Opponents call the schools a discriminatory throwback. Word, discriminatory. Right. But if you look up what's happening with Goldman Sachs, Google, Visa, anybody claiming discrimination there? I didn't think so. Anyway, race is not the issue because 90% of Detroit's public school students are black, but opponents say that in denying girls access, the academies are ignoring the problem of inner city girls, like teenage pregnancy and dependence on welfare. There's clearly a crisis, but the crisis is all urban school children, says Howard Simon, executive director of ACLU of Michigan. These schools may open up a whole new world for these boys that should be open to girls too. This is what's problematic. A lot of my work in black male studies is unapologetically identifying black boys and men that need the attention. They need the attention in terms of policy. They need the attention in terms of public scrutiny. They need the attention in terms of resources and support. But we have this practice of, if you name them, it's inherently exclusionary, it's inherently sexist, it's inherently racist to identify just black boys and men. We got to talk about everybody, right? And when everybody is talked about, black boys and men find their ways out of the conversation, right? That's one of the things that happened. I've seen it happen at Fresno State. I've seen it happen at larger institutions. I've seen it happen in terms of national policy. We are hesitant to speak very directly and unapologetically toward the needs of Black boys and men for fear of being labeled. And yet, when we allow that conversation to undermine any efforts we have toward uplifting them, they continue to fall further, right? And we know now, first of all, even though this is 1991, there's never been a year in American history where more Black males have gotten college degrees than Black women. So we're really not talking about something that's going to negatively impact girls in a way where boys are going to have an advantage, not in the Black community. It's not going to happen. But we talk about it that way, and therefore people shoot down any targeted, focus on Black males and boys as if it's inherently sexist. But if there's a targeted focus on girls and women, it's received well, because the assumption is that women and girls have to be doing worse, because that's the narrative that comes out of the white community. And even that's problematic, and it's not always true. But for Black boys, it's rarely true that they are advantaged over girls and women. But anyway, you can tell this one pissed me off. So anyway, so at issue is whether the crisis facing young Black men justifies the exclusion of girls. Get this straight, sorry. The exclusion of girls from these specialized academies, and whether indeed single-sex schools are the best setting in which to teach Black boys. While the boys-only schools are not officially restricted to Blacks only, they are in fact aimed specifically at Black youths who made up the overwhelming majority of students. Supporters cite statistic after statistic to explain the extraordinary remedy they seek. In virtually all Black district virtually all Black district of 170,000 students, 70% are being reared by single mothers. That's up to nearly 80 at this point. Nearly 2 out of every 3 boys entering high school in Detroit do not make it to graduation, as against 1 of every 3 girls. Black boys account for the overwhelming majority of disciplinary problems. And I don't know if they're going to mention it yet, but we also know that when it comes to being assigned to special education, that is something that Black boys are unparalleled in that. So already though, because this is specific to Detroit, we can see the data. 2 out of every 3 boys entering high school in Detroit do not graduate, right? Put another way, only 1 out of 3 do, right? Whereas against one of Detroit, as against 1, this is badly written, as against 1 every 3 girls. Right? So basically what they're saying here is that 1 out of 3 girls don't graduate, whereas 1 out of 3 boys do. But no, we can't do anything for boys because we can't. Right. Okay. And in a city where some neighborhoods gunfire is as common as the sound of the ice cream truck, homicide is the leading cause of death among Black males over the age of 10. People looked at the statistics on the life chances of African-American males and their lack of performance at every level of the school system and decided that what we were doing wasn't working, said Dr. Deborah McGriff, the newly appointed superintendent of schools. The Detroit plan goes much further than that of New York, where political divisions have left a Black male school called the Ujamaa Institute on hold, or even Milwaukee, where the idea first gained attention. There, 2 schools devoted to African-American curriculums, originally planned exclusively for boys, will open to both boys and girls next month. Detroit's male academies, as they are called, are to provide the regular curriculum, with teaching infused by African-centered education and training in what it means to be a man for about 560 boys at 3 grade schools. Right? The teachers are getting special training in Afrocentric curriculum and in alternative teaching methods. Black men teachers are being recruited as role models. Saturday classes and extra tutoring are planned. Right? School district argues that Black boys need intensive, specially tailored instruction and discipline to build self-esteem and to keep them from falling through the cracks. The district points to the de facto all Black, all boys schools that already exist here, like the High School Development Center in Detroit, a school of last resort for students with suspension and disciplinary problems that happens to be all male. We've had all boys schools in urban areas for all the wrong reasons, says Dr. Clifford Watson, principal of Cooper Elementary School, the site of one of the 3 new male academies. The moment we start to talk about something preventative, then the folks come out of the woodwork. Right. So there already are predominantly black male schools, but they are really kind of punitive. They're really a school of last resort, right? Whereas we're talking about schools that are designed to prevent them from having to go there. Anyway, so some educators fear that the expectations in Detroit may be too high, that whatever is tried within the walls of these academies, however noble, may not turn around the lives of children who must go to bed hungry or dodge bullets to get to school. But proponents repeatedly cite the successes of other single-sex endeavors, ranging from the Boys Choir of Harlem to military academies and parochial schools. When a man walks into a room and says, "Johnny, sit down," Johnny sits down, said Dr. Spencer H. Holland, director of the Center for Educating African American Males at Morgan State University in Baltimore. These boys have not really seen men who are nurturing, men who are kind. Dr. McGriff and several school board members say that they want to start a similar school for girls here, a proposal that still would not satisfy the objection of the plaintiffs, but one they hope would meet federal requirements for comparable facilities for both sexes. While the Detroit schools have been described as the only ones in the country explicitly for black boys, the board, mindful of the pending lawsuit, argues that the schools have not really barred girls from applying, but have decided to give preference to boys, knowing that they will have more than enough applications for boys to fill the 560 places. Indeed, one girl was inadvertently admitted through the school's lottery and will be accepted. Right? So this was interesting. So just in terms of that paragraph, right? They talked about, let's see, while the Detroit schools have been described as the only ones in the country, right? The only ones in the country explicitly for black boys. So understand what that means. 3 schools, 3 grade schools in 1991 that would have been the only type, the only kind of its ilk in the entire country was opposed because it might actually help boys. But this idea that girls are being excluded from something, even though the data even at that time showed that it was, but anyway. All right, so I'm going to continue before I get real pissed off and lose it. For now, the academies are getting ready for the first day of school on August 27th, devising their new uniforms and textbooks. The schools are already being informally called by their new working names: Malcolm X Academy, Marcus Garvey Academy, and Paul Robeson Academy, referring to the slain black Muslim leader, the black nationalist who led a Back to Africa movement early in the century, and the classical actor. Dr. Watson's school, Woodward Elementary, has become Malcolm X Academy. For years and with great frustration, he's presided over this all-black school in one of Detroit's toughest neighborhoods, where 80% of the students are being reared by single mothers and where neighborhood gangs do some of their best recruiting. The children must walk by crack houses to get to school. Many are former crack babies themselves. They come to a school where there are only 3 men in the building, including the principal, because so few black men work for the system, often having no fathers at home and seeing that the only men with any money in the neighborhood are drug dealers. The boys hunger for male direction. Now, I should also say that those of us who've actually taught K through 12 as black men found themselves hitting a glass ceiling in terms of what we were trying to do in our classrooms, what we were trying to do to help, and how we were barred from being able to do even things that we knew would work in a micro situation, right? Often barred from doing it, to the degree that black men much of the time would leave. But the other part of what we would often find happening was that black males who would come into the teaching profession would find themselves being treated as enforcers, where you'd be sent all of the most difficult students placed in one room simply because you were a black male, especially if you had a female administrator over you, right? She would treat you as some type of enforcer, even have you go from class to class and helping the female teachers out by hyper disciplining the boys that were a problem and then eventually getting them yourselves. Now, you know, if you had a nationalist kind of background, much of the time you did this kind of thing because you thought it would help. But when you began to notice that you were being treated like little more than a thug, and when you had ideas about how to evolve your classroom past a repository for difficult boys into something constructive, you were told you couldn't do it. And I've had scores of men from across the country tell me about, in the last 20 to 30 years, eventually just having to walk away. But not because of the kids, because the institutions in place, or I should say the structures in place that prevented them from being able to do or even experiment with what might work. Right? Okay, in the last year, the situation has reached a crisis stage, Dr. Watson said. The school janitor was killed in a drive-by shooting, a preschooler was shot in the back, and the mother of one boy pulled her son out of the school because he owed a drug dealer he was working for $300 and needed cover. Her son was in the 3rd grade. How do you owe a drug dealer $300 as a 3rd grader? Jesus. Having run out of options, Dr. Watson went to the school board with a drastic proposal to turn his school into an all-male academy. Board members, the majority of whom are black, and as frustrated as he was, voted 10-1 in favor of the academies last February. Because the schools had so little time to organize, the first year at 2 of the academies, including Malcolm X, will be essentially schools within schools until the remaining students can be transferred elsewhere. Paul Robeson Academy will be entirely male from the start. And we do need more of these, by the way. We do need, even now, we need more. But anyway, it closes. In this overwhelmingly black city, the question is not much whether such a program is a good idea, but who gets to participate. Sean Garrett, an insurance clerk and the mother of a 4-year-old daughter, Crystal, says she would have enrolled her daughter if she thought she could have. She is now one of the plaintiffs in the discrimination lawsuit. And she says, I want my daughter to have the best too. Now we're going back to segregation as if it's okay in certain circumstances. You didn't have a problem with segregation when it overwhelmingly hyper-targeted the boys. Where was the critique of segregation then? But see, this is what we're talking about. In this particular instance, what you saw was the push to dismantle this idea, right? And democratize it, or whatever they're trying to, make this argument of desegregate, and just the very idea of targeting males is being led by a black woman. Now, why do I point this out from an arbitrary article from 1991? Well, fast forward. And let's fast forward to President Barack Obama's My Brother's Keeper program. What happened with that? Anybody remember? I can tell you. One of the things that happened is feminists across the country were the first ones to challenge it and dismantle it because they made the argument that it was discriminatory to women and to girls in particular, right? Discriminatory. And they sent around, a petition. Now, prior to my introduction to black male studies, I was kind of guilted into it, but I own it. I signed it because I was still functioning with this idea. Actually, at that point, I was just starting to argue with myself about my training as a CompuServe. I was arguing with myself about what this meant. And so when a colleague of mine introduced it, I signed it, and I regret doing so. And I was going through my transformation, so I should have saw it for what it was. The only thing I could do at that time is I said, wait a minute, isn't there a White House Council for Women and Girls? And she just didn't respond, because there was one. Wasn't a White House Council for Men and Boys, let alone black men and boys. There hasn't been a policy put forth for black men and boys of any significance, even with Biden creating executive orders on behalf of Asians and LGBT. Any mention of black boys or men, ones being killed on TV, in the news, right? Yeah, we can spark a rebellion when our deaths piss people off, at least symbolically so, but what policies come from it? What political cachet, what political real estate comes from it that benefits black men and boys? It's not happening. Other groups benefit from our deaths. Black boys and men don't even benefit from their own goddamn deaths. And so in 1991, and with President Barack Obama, no significant targeting of black men or boys, and when even the gesture was entertained, it was shot down by who? Conservative whites? Maybe conceptually, but who put pen to paper and foot to pavement to make sure these things didn't happen in a way that might have helped boys and men? Black women. And then now that we have these kind of private industry investments in black womanhood, right, from Goldman Sachs to Visa to MasterCard to Google, are any of those same black women pounding the pavements for black boys and men? When I called out all last year and asked people why we haven't seen any targeted pandemic and entrepreneurial programs, grants designed to help black business owners, did we see any of them targeted for black men? No. Did anybody care? No. Now here's the thing. I understand that it's really still, just like it was in the early 80s, still to this day, it's really a small group of extreme feminists that push this garbage. But here's the problem. My problem is not so much with that group, because they're small. It's actually those who co-sign this and don't challenge it. So when you got black boys who, by the 8th grade level, only 10% of whom can read at grade level. When it comes to math or science, only 12% can perform at grade level. When that's happening nationally, and the mothers are not putting foot to pavement, they're not raising hell about it, that pisses me off. Because we can see that hell can be raised when someone's killed, just so long as those men, those very same men being killed, can't have significant positions in the organization that are rallying these protests. But even when it comes to people who would, they'd burn schools down if girls couldn't read. They have nothing to say about their sons, nothing to say about their boys. And we accept it. So when BGS sent me this, it took me a while to understand why, until I finally sat down and read it. And I was like, oh shit, okay. He knew I was going to go through the roof. Because this is ridiculous. And it speaks to this idea of women finding any focus on men, black men in particular, to be an inherent gesture of sexism. But no statement whatsoever about the sexism of boys not being able to perform. Of boys being the number one group to be put out of schools at record numbers, pushed into special ed. No statement about the bifurcation of sexism in that regard. Institutional sexism. Because look, if girls were failing out of school, specifically on the basis of being girls, being pushed into special ed, being pushed into detention, being kicked out of schools, we would call it sexism. Do we call it sexism when it's the boys? No, we call it par for the course. And when we start to develop remedies specifically for them, we complain that it's inherently sexist. Word. Anybody say it was sexist when it was black women that were deemed the most enrolled in higher education a couple years ago? Was that deemed as sexist? No, it was deemed as an accomplishment. But even the very gesture of creating an environment that might produce black males that can function on that level is perceived as sexist. This double standard that leaves black men and boys in deficient positions has got to fucking stop. It's ridiculous. And I would say anybody, black male, black female, white, doesn't matter. Anybody that opposes any kind of special focus to help black men and boys is a goddamn traitor or, an enemy. And they need to be treated as such. I don't give a damn what your hair texture looks like. I don't care how dark you are. I don't care how many books you've read. I don't care what degrees you have. I don't care how black you consider yourself, what flags you drape yourself in. I don't care if you call yourself a Pan-Africanist. If you stand against boys, black boys, having their situations targeted in a constructive way and have nothing to say whatsoever when girls and women are prioritized in a way and nobody says anything about their male counterparts, you are the problem. Just as much as any institution that continues to alienate and isolate the boys. Just as much. You're a problem. And you need to get out of the damn way. Because too many of our boys are dying. Too many of them are struggling. Too many of them are living in fucking hell. As boys. So where do they go when they're men? Yo, I hope that you will join me, support the channel, like, share, subscribe, join, donate, do whatever you can, but support the channel, join me in speaking out and really getting men to the point where we can identify what this shit is, call it out, speak it loudly and unapologetically. And let me tell you this, and this is a response to one brother who wrote me, and he was saying something along the lines of, I support your show, but I noticed the more I support your show, my girlfriend doesn't like it. Let me tell you something. This is not about me. If she doesn't like that you can talk about the discriminatory treatment of black boys and men and advocate for them, well, I can't tell you what to do, but I'll tell you what I will do. I will walk the fuck away from anybody that tells me that my son is not human enough to deserve to be targeted for what he needs, especially when we have no problem doing it for other groups. If you got a problem with black men speaking on the needs of black boys and men, or brothers, you find yourself with somebody, I don't care if it's a friend, a lover, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, if anybody takes issue with that, I can't tell you what to do, but I tell you what I do, and I have done. I will walk the fuck away. Because if that's the stance you take, you don't need to be in my space at all. Be well. I hope to hear from you, brothers. If anybody has any additional information on this or any other similar stories, please make sure you share them in the comment section, y'all.